Hi, I'm Steve Kepp, co-founder of From Day One, our forum on corporate values. In the midst of Black History Month, when we've all been reading and listening to some remarkable stories about the past, we also thought it would be useful to turn the lens around and look to the future. In today's webinar, we'll be exploring a topic that focuses on workplace transformation and the need for more Black leaders to ascend to the top ranks of business. Our title for today's session is History in the Making, the Future of Black Leadership in Corporate America. While it's clear that there's no shortage of Black talent in corporate America, there still remains a systemic failure to promote and retain them to leadership roles. At a time when businesses have renewed their commitments to racial justice, are they upholding their promises to build supportive environments where Black leaders can grow and thrive? Who are the decision makers, the change agents, and the allies creating space for the next generation of Black leaders to advance? And how are Black leaders charting their own paths forward? Our sponsors today are Bravely, Monster, Emtrain, and LCW. I'll tell you a bit about each one of them. Bravely connects your people to on-demand confidential coaching in the moments that define the employee experience. Access to Bravely's network of vetted professional coaches fosters employee well-being and development to supercharge performance and help people thrive at work. When leading organizations offer Bravely to everyone, they scale the support offered by their people teams and transform their cultures in an evolving world of work. Monster is a global leader in connecting people and jobs, understanding that every individual is unique and these differences need to be celebrated. With access to new diversity networks that span traditionally underrepresented groups focused on race, ethnicity, and LGBTQIA communities, our flexible solutions scale to match specific hiring needs. Emtrain's workplace culture platform reinvents compliance training with provocative content that sparks dialogue and unique cultural dynamics that drive individual and organizational behavioral change. Emtrain AI allows you to benchmark your culture against the global community to identify issues before they become toxic problems that can become compliance issues and destroy culture. And lastly, but not least, at LCW, cultural competence is at the core of everything they do. In a world increasingly defined by diversity, they help professionals reach a level of deeper understanding and develop more rewarding connections with both colleagues and customers. From Fortune 100 companies to local nonprofits, LCW works with organizations that have both a national and international presence. Their blended and practical training and consulting approach helps scale long-term behavioral change across organizations. Thanks to all the sponsors. Now, a few quick logistical items. This webinar is being recorded and will be available on demand soon after the event, so you can look out for an email in about 24 hours with the link. That email will also have info on how you can get professional development credits for this session from the Society of Human Resource Management. And look out for a written account of the conversation soon on our website at fromday1.co. At around 3 p.m. Eastern, the top of the hour, we'll have a Q&A session. You can submit your questions anytime using the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. Now, I'd like to introduce our moderator, Mila Skinner, outgoing Chief of Staff to the CEO at One Goal, a nonprofit education advocacy organization that works alongside high school and college students from disinvested communities. She's also the founder and managing partner of Quarter 5, a coaching and consulting firm that works with businesses as they navigate complex and consequential change, including DEI advising. Okay, Mila, over to you.
Thanks, Steve. Well, good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you are in the country. Regardless of your location, I hope everyone who is joining us today is well. I am incredibly excited to moderate this dynamic panel. You will see on your screen a group of fantastic individuals that you're going to both learn more about and hear more from. We're going to spend the next hour and a half or so discussing the future of Black leadership in corporate America. It might be easy to assume that this topic is only for Black leaders or for individuals who manage Black employees, but this topic is for everyone. We all know that inclusion and diversity are essential to the success of our businesses, our communities, our country, and our world. And so we must see topics like this as important to all of us. Lila Watson, an Aboriginal elder and activist, an educator from Queensland, Australia, said in a quote, "If you have come to help me, you are wasting your time. If you have come because your liberation is bound up with mine, then let us work together. I'm going to say that one more time because I think it's incredibly powerful. If you have come to help me, you are wasting your time. If you have come because your liberation is bound up with mine, then let us work together. And so I am hopeful that today, during our conversation, we're going to talk about how this work is all of ours and the responsibility is all of ours. A few things to note about my style of moderation. I love conversation. I've probably talked too long already, but I love conversation and I love dialogue and I love to engage. So we're going to seek not to bore you during this panel. My hope is you walk away and say, that was the best freaking panel that I have ever seen. And so no pressure to my panelists. That means I am going to ask questions of our panelists, but I'm going to ask different questions. And I've already talked to this group of dynamos and we have talked about engaging one another. And so I won't ask a question for every panelist except for the very first one. And then I'm going to ask the panelists to take it away and engage with one another. My job is to encourage conversation, keep us moving, and ensure we have rich discourse. And so that's my job, and I have no doubt that this group will do that. I have a few questions that I have teed up, but again, hoping for an engaging dialogue. And so first question for folks is I am going to ask all of the participants, we're going to do something incredible, and I'm going to ask you all to go with me. I'm putting you on the spot, folks. We're going to go in alphabetical order by first name. So look at the names on your screen. You could do it. You could do it. And I'm going to ask you to introduce yourself. Tell us your name, the role within your company, and then also please share why this topic is so important to you.
Alphabetical order by first name always means that I start. So I'm Adia Harvey Wingfield. I'm the Mary Towson Hemingway Professor in Arts and Sciences at Washington University in St. Louis, where I'm also the Associate Dean for Faculty Development. My field is sociology, and I've spent most of my career researching racial and gender inequality in professional occupations with a focus on different groups in the workplace. So this panel is near and dear to my heart, and I'm excited to talk about my own research and that of my colleagues and what we know from the data about how and why racial and gender inequality persists in professional occupations and what we can do about it.
Love that, quite succinct. Hi, my name is Dion Bullock, and I am the Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Belonging Strategy Lead with Bravely. And the work that I do is both internal, so making sure that we practice what we preach within our organization to create an environment of diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, but then also coaching and consulting and supporting organizations to enhance their own diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging strategies. And the reason why this conversation is important to me is one, because our work is focused on democratizing and eventually creating equitable access to coaching for employees and thinking about what it means to be able to clear the path and clear the barriers for specifically Black employees in this instance, clearing the path to their growth and development. And then I am a part of this conversation selfishly as a Black leader in the corporate America and startup space, thinking about what it means for us to be able to build and maintain and enhance this group and think about what it means for us to lead as Black folks in this space.
I think I'm next. I'm Marion Brooks. I'm the Vice President and U.S. Country Head of Diversity and Inclusion at Novartis Pharmaceuticals. I'm also an executive coach and an author. I've been with Novartis for 21 years and spent the majority of my career on the commercial side of the business. Yes, I started when I was in elementary school, but I spent the majority of my career on the commercial side of the business. So I was the first African-American man to be a head of marketing within the organization, as well as I was a head of sales. So I have a deep passion around people and development, and I'm really excited to be a part of this conversation.
Well, thank you for having me today. My name is Marvin Davenport. I serve as the Vice President for VSP Global VSP is a 65-year-old vision care company that specializes in insurance and creation of frames for your sunglasses, eyewear, et cetera. The work in which we do is very focused in on servicing our members and our providers from an OD perspective, optometry perspective. I serve as the Vice President of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, which has responsibility for internal programmatic efforts as well as external engagement for the company. I'm looking forward to this conversation because this is important to me as a result of wanting to ensure that it's not a conversation that we need to have in the future by appropriate representation. So thank you for having me today.
Well, good afternoon. My name is Ryan Polly, and I am the Vice President of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion for Maine Health, which is the largest healthcare system in the state of Maine. And I've been in the state of Maine for about a year. I've been doing DEI work for over a decade formally, but really throughout my entire life, I've been involved in DEI in some capacity. For me, I bring a different perspective. Maine is the whitest state in the country. And, people are engaged in the conversation, but they're not exactly sure what that means. And so as a leader in a very white state and as a white leader, first and foremost, I'm here to really listen to everyone on this panel and continue to learn on how we can continue to create appropriate spaces and challenge our systems. And I'm here to also provide perspective to other white leaders who might be on the call thinking, what do I do in a white space to engage the conversation? So I'm excited and thank you for having me.
Thank you all so much. You did a fantastic job. I have to say, I was taken back to elementary school and I'm like, M-A-R-I-V. Okay, I before V. But Marvin and Marion, you did great. So I want to kick off with our first question. So thank you all. So want to talk a little bit about what we're seeing right now in businesses. So I wonder if, actually, let's start with Marvin and Marion, since we were there in the first place. Holistically, what are you seeing across businesses and industries related to their commitment to support and grow Black talent?
We'll go in alphabetical. You want to go first, maybe?
First. So what I'm seeing is a lot of commitment and a lot of conversations about what everyone is going to do and what we're committed to doing. The question is, what are the actions behind the commitment? And then how are we going to hold ourselves accountable when it's not trending, when it's not in the headlines? Will we stay committed to this? And what are the infrastructures that we're putting in place to ensure that that happens? So that's the important part for me. The conversations are great, but the commitments are even better. The actions are where it really matters.
Yeah, I agree with that. And just to add to it, the one thing that I see a lot of is within the communication space, a lot of companies are committing and communicating on their public platforms that they are wanting to ensure that they have a part in driving this work forward from a representation standpoint. And I think that's great. The opportunity there is to ensure that it's sustainable long term. And so while they are sourcing and attracting the talent, are they able to retain the talent? Are they able to keep the talent beyond the first year, 2 years with the company? And so if they are not able to do that, I think it puts us in a backsliding state in a few years that we're going to see if there's not intentionality there. And that means that there has to be a lot of culture work done within some of the companies to ensure that they're able to, play it forward.
Excellent. Thank you all so much. So, Marvin, you just spoke about culture, and I want to take this to Dion a little bit because Dion, I've heard you directly talk about language about belonging, and I know that is I don't want to call it an addition, but people are expanding. We'll go with that beyond just DEI and really starting to think about the commitment to belonging. And so wonder for you, Dion, and Adia probably, why this notion of belonging, and what is the role for organizations in thinking about the cultures that they create that are supportive to Black individuals as they are growing and learning and doing more and wanting to continue to succeed in their work and roles.
Great. So happy to respond to that. So in thinking about belonging, it's really for us thinking about this concept of what it means to be a part of an organization and bring your whole self to work. And I'll add nuance to it to say the goal is to focus on autonomy and self-determination when it comes to what parts of your identity that you want to be able to bring to work. I am or used to be pre-COVID, really into karaoke, right? I don't need to sing every day at work, but if I chose to talk about my affinity for karaoke or singing at work, I won't be judged or ostracized or ridiculed or told that I need to assimilate, right? And that's a more trivial example, but these are, when you bring it to identity, these are real lived experiences where folks are making calculations every day about what parts of their identities can they talk about. Is there a certain way that I need to speak? Is there a certain way that I need to engage with my colleagues? Is there a certain way that I need to talk about my weekend and what I did and if the TV show or the movie that I watch is going to appeal to people who might not be in the same community that I'm in, right? So just being mindful about the intentional opportunities to bring parts of your identity into the workplace and not necessarily have to cover, have to feel like you have to assimilate or be judged for those things. And I think it's truly important for when we talk about the future of Black leadership, when we're thinking about what the concept of leadership even is it aligned to or create space for people who are part of different communities or have different cultures outside of the white norm?
Yeah, I think that's an excellent example. I would just add to it that, so research indicates that for a lot of workers from underrepresented backgrounds, that's a constant struggle, this idea of how much of myself I can actually bring to work and how much of myself I can expose. And I would just add that the important thing to think about here, one of the important things to think about is that to some degree, this is a dynamic that's present for workers across the board, right? That many of us wrestle with how authentic to be in the workspace and how much of ourselves we can truly show. The challenge, I think, for many Black workers, though, is that depicting an authentic representation of self comes with the risk of being stereotyped and misjudged from that authenticity, right? So it's not just this challenge of, do I take out my tongue ring before going to work because people might make assumptions about that? It's this question of, can I talk honestly about my family, about my upbringing, about my weekend, about being racially profiled on the way to work, right? And the risk that talking openly about those things might lead to prejudgment and stereotypes from coworkers, particularly if you're in the minority who may not have the tools to deal with and reflect on and think about what it means to bring that experience into the workplace. Often organizations are not equipped to have those kinds of conversations and to allow workers to be fully present and to fully bring those aspects of their work experience into a space, or to consider how those particular experiences may shape or influence the way that workers can contribute to a particular organization. So I think those are parts of the conversation around culture that are essential to have.
Excellent. Thank you so much. So I want to move to the next question. And Ryan, I want to start with you, but I would encourage anyone to lean in. Marion, I think specifically about you with your time at Novartis, and I'm sure seeing how the organization has changed and grown. But Ryan, again, want to start with you on the role that businesses with limited access to diverse talent can play. And so whether from your own experience or your own thinking, what are or how are you at Maine Health thinking about, as you mentioned, where your location is, you don't necessarily have the access to diverse talent. So what are the commitments that you're making to support and grow either talent or to advancing efforts around Black leadership?
Thank you. And it's an interesting struggle that people who haven't put a lot of thought to this start thinking about, oh, well, we don't have the talent I hear a lot of things, we're not diverse. It's just not something we should, why do we have a diversity leader? And it gets onto people's mind. But then when you kind of take that step back and start looking around and recognizing we actually do have the talent. Now I'll speak to where I'm located. I can't speak to every organization, but oftentimes in organizations that are in, predominantly white or predominantly heteronormative or whatever it might be, if you just sort of take that step back and look around, the talent is there. And often they're very talented people that are not seen and not heard, right? So what happens, right, is we have these environments where we make decisions and, good example, who are we going to put on our diversity council? Oh, I know these 3 people, and because we're interacting with those people we know. So one of the things that I think that organizations that are very white, particularly when you look at your white leadership, needs to start to do is start to get comfortable making relationships with people that aren't white. I mean, there's a need for our white leaders to create those bridges and build relationships. And I find that many times a lot of white leaders just don't have a network of relationships outside of whiteness. And so therefore their lens, their bias becomes the white people they know, even if it's not with intention. So how do we build those relationships? There's a lot of talk about reverse mentoring. In other words, taking folks who are Black and they are mentoring these white executives to build bridges and relationships, and getting white executives to start to see, maybe challenging their own lenses. The other thing I would say is organizations who have never done this before need to take a look at who they are. And so that is bringing in a consulting firm, preferably a firm that is Black owned, who have been doing this work for a long time, that can look under the hood at policies, at unwritten rules, how we interact with one another, not just, oh, this policy is written this way, but focus groups, talking to people, and particularly with consultants who are of the demographic that we're trying to learn from. So having a Black-owned business speaking to Black employees, creating that safe space for people to be honest with the information is really important before, to Marion's point, we need to take action. Without that information, the action falls flat, right? It becomes those commitments, but we don't see the momentum, the infrastructure that was brought up earlier. So taking the time to really look under the hood and figure out where our own biases are as, organizations that have been built in this systemic racist environment that we're talking about, is really, really important in order to create those opportunities for advancement. And I guess the last thing I would just say on that is, if the talent exists in the organization, talking to, building a relationship and listening to the talent, understanding where the barriers are, like Dion just said about, can I show up and can I be myself at work? Listening and understanding and creating the space for people who are in those positions to lead this effort, not to tokenize, but to lead in tandem and in support and relationship with one another to create the space is really important as well.
I agree with all of Ryan's points. I'd like to add, there's this myth out there that we have to kill, that there's not qualified, diverse talent out in the market, right? Or that we need to go back to elementary school to start to train people to be qualified for the role. And I tell everyone in our organization, there's an African-American person, there's a Latinx person, there's an Asian person that is qualified for every role in this organization, from the CEO all the way down the line, that is out there. The question is, number one, where are you recruiting? Where are you looking? And then number two, what is your reputation? Do they want to come to your organization? Do they feel they can grow and develop within your organization? So those are the two questions that organizations have to ask themselves. But we have to get out of this mindset that there's not diverse talent out there. I've had a number of roles and hired a lot of people. And I've consistently had recruiters come back to me and say, well, we couldn't find any diverse talent. And I was like, I can call 5 people right now on my phone. Again, where are you fishing? And if you keep fishing in the same pond and expecting different fish, that's insanity. So you have to expand where you're going. So a couple of things that we've done at Novartis is we established new hiring guidelines last year that require diversity on the interviewing panel as well as in our candidate pools before you can move forward. Now, the reason for that was based on research. And there's research that shows if you only have one woman or one person of color in a candidate pool, statistically, they have no chance of receiving an offer for the role. Just by adding one additional qualified woman or person of color to that candidate pool, it goes up to over 50% that one of them would receive an offer. And it's because of confirmation bias. You've broken up the confirmation bias that is in all of our brains, because if you see a group and everyone is the same, it's very homogeneous, you feel, well, one of them must be the best candidate. This person is an outlier. So things like that. Another thing is to really invest in building meaningful relationships in diverse communities before you have an opening. So we hired a D&I scouting and recruiting team for the first time in the company's history last year. And we are building those relationships, and we're building a bench of diverse talent, and we're building those relationships right now. So when we have opportunity, we will be able to tap into that. So that's the external. Now, internally, what are we doing to identify, invest, and support the diverse talent we have in the organization? And so we created a multicultural engagement program last year, where we identified African-American talent that we felt had the potential to go to the next level. And now what were we going to do to foster that? And I'm happy to say that in less than a year, 50% of the people that were in that program have already received promotions. And now we're expanding the program this year to the Latinx community and the African-American community. And we're going to invest in the people, because it's not that they don't have the talent. They just haven't had the investment that others have received. And we're trying to break that up.
I just want to add one last thing to that, because I want to zero in on the talent acquisition group within that process. Sometimes you already have the diversity within your candidate pool. So you truly need to assess the candidate slates that come in to ensure that you have a diverse candidate slate to push to that hiring manager. Because some of the times they just sit knocking at the door, but nobody answers. And they've already applied for your positions and applied for your opportunities. The other piece to that also, from a company mechanism standpoint, do you have mechanisms and processes in place that are adversely impacting your ability to attract that diverse talent? So that might be location-bound positions, because there's this company rule, unwritten rule, that all the positions have to be in X location. Well, is that really necessary? COVID has really helped a lot of companies see the light within that process, that all positions don't need to be at headquarters. There might be some that are definitely restricted in terms of location because they might work in a facility or an operation lab, et cetera. But does every single position have to be there? And then that's another angle in which you could start to source a much broader population. McKinsey reporting just released an article yesterday about race in the workplace. And in that article, it references that over 60 or nearly 60% of Black labor force talent sits in southern states. So at a minimum, do you have operations from your company perspective if you're sourcing diverse talent within any of those locations? And if you don't, that might be a great place to start to evaluate how can we start to engage that population.
I mean, you all are living up to the best panel ever. So I'm just very, very proud and very excited. Just wanted to do a little affirmation. So very interesting. I'm going to add in my own 2 cents, and then we're going to pivot. I have this firm belief that we have to stop talking about DEI in our workplaces and start really thinking about it in our communities. In order to bring your whole self to work, it must mean that like your whole self is understood and engaging with people that are broad and wide, and that we have to get out of this notion of like DEI being this plan for work, as opposed to it being who you are in your life, what you do, how you stretch outside of your bounds. Otherwise, I think someone just talked about this, like we become this echo chamber where we're only talking to people that have the same lived experiences and same ideas and same thoughts, and we're not living into the fullness of our communities and back to the quote, into our liberation. So I digress, and I'm going to come back to you all for your questions. But next question is about work, and Marvin, we already started this conversation, Marion, and so I want to have some others engage on this. But work that organizations and businesses that they're doing, excuse me, that is innovative or exciting, and that's changing the game, Marion. I loved your example. Specifically, you mentioned this earlier in a pre-conversation, you're a data wonk. So I love the, like, here's the data that goes along with this. But I would love to hear other things that people are seeing or doing, whether it is within your organization or outside, that are innovative and have an opportunity to create momentum and real change. So Dion, I'd love to start with you, but then would have anyone jump in who's interested in sharing.
Yeah, so definitely want to hear from my other colleagues around this or other panelists around this. One of the things that I've seen a lot is similar to what Marion mentioned, is just really making sure that you are investing in your people. So when you're talking about wanting to see advancement and wanting to see diversity within leadership, it's one, making sure that they are looking at what the criteria is for leadership and what the criteria is for advancement. So one of the places that I've been trying to work with companies on is to look at performance reviews, and even before performance reviews, to start looking at work assignment. So one of the ways in which people are able to advance within their organizations is based on visibility. So Ryan, you mentioned, oh, I'm going to talk to the 3 people that I know to sit on this committee. Oh, I'm going to talk to those people in order for promotion as well. So when you start to look at work assignment and to talk to managers about how you then delegate work and who gets those projects, who gets put on those, you know, high risk projects, or the projects that have the super fast turnaround that you can't just give to anybody, you have to give it to your top performer, to be mindful of who those people are and what those opportunities are. So you can define what those stretch opportunities are for folks and be mindful of where the disparities are. So just been working with different leaders that I coach with Bravely to start having these conversations, because they've been seeing, when it comes to performance reviews, they've noticed a disproportionality, seeing that Black employees were getting lower marks across the board than their other employees. And when we started digging into it, it was a question of, well, what is the actual performance review process like? Well, it is one manager talking to other managers about what the performance should be and how they want to calibrate it across. Well, do those other managers know the employee that they're actually doing the calibration for? The answer was no, or they don't know them well enough in comparison to some of the other employees. So even though we can talk about investing in major programs and initiatives, a lot of it comes to finding those places within your organization and finding those places within your teams that has the propensity for bias, right? And addressing those, so that when you start going to the defined processes, you don't have to worry about those turning out disproportionate results.
Excellent. Thank you, Dion. Go ahead, Mary.
I wanted to just add a couple of quick things. So Dion, I agree with you 100%. And when you think about it, it's about being mentored versus sponsored. So what you were talking about, those conversations in those rooms, those are sponsorship opportunities, not mentorship. And if you look at all of the research, it shows you that people of color are over-mentored and under-sponsored. 90% of the decisions that are made about all of us in our careers are made when we are not in the room. Whether we get hired, not hired, our performance rating, our bonus, layoff, all of those decisions. So who's in the room speaking for you? That's where we also have to make sure that we start to look at how we address that. and build those relationships that Ryan was referring to with people that don't look like us, that have exceptional character and exceptional skills that are not getting the platform to demonstrate them. So that's a key component. And one of the other things, back to the original question around what are some unique things that are happening, we're exploring removing the names and any type of ethnic component from the applications and from resumes. Because there's actually, again, I'm a nerd, but the research, and I see my colleague shaking her head, research shows that there was a study done and it showed that Jamal, same resume, you guys know what I'm talking about, same resume, Jamal needed 7 more years of experience than Jeffrey. Same exact resume, but just changing the name to Jamal from Jeffrey, 7 more years were required before Jamal was ready, but Jeffrey was ready that day. So those types of things make a big difference because it evens the playing field, at least to a degree as far as engagement is concerned.
Well, Dion, Marion, just give me just a second. I have to, no problem. I'm going to come right back to you. Steve from Day One has asked for a moment. This is what we call our commercial break. So Steve, I'm going to pass it to you. And then Addie, as soon as we're done with Steve, I want to come back to you for hold your thought, please.
Thanks, Mila. Hi, everybody. I'd just like to remind anyone joining our webinar in midstream that we're from Day One and we're exploring history in the making, the future of Black leadership in corporate America. Our sponsors are Bravely, Monster, Emtrain, and LCW. As a reminder, you can submit your questions at any time and we'll answer as many as we can during the Q&A session at the top of the hour. Now back to you, Lydia.
By Lydia, I think you mean Mila.
I mean, Mila.
Thanks, Steve. No worries. I've also been saying Adia's name incorrectly and wanted to make sure that I corrected that for the full audience and for our panel and for myself in particular. And so extreme apologies, Adia. Am I saying it correctly now?
No.
Adia.
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 I mean,
Adia.
you could just use doctor as well. That works too.
That's why I didn't say the name. That's why I didn't say her name. I just said my colleague because I didn't want to mess it up.
I feel like doctor works as just as well.
We're all going to say it together. Come on, team. We're going to do this together. Adia. Adia.
Adia. I got it now. Locked in.
We have to honor our sister here, make sure that we are saying her name accurately and appropriately. We will call you doctor if that's what you would like, but at minimum, we need to say your first name correctly. So Adia, please have at it.
This happens a lot, so I'm used to correcting people as I go, so no worries. But I was just going to say that since we're on the subject of research, which, like Marion, is a topic that I love to talk about, I would just add that I think from the data on hiring, where we know this is a site where a lot of discrimination happens in terms of people just getting access into companies in the first place. For one thing, given that hiring discrimination is such an issue, one thing that I always recommend and that we've had some success with in my own department, and we're in academic space, so a little bit different, but I think some of these processes still are useful, is that we've actually made it a point to try to be very proactive when it comes to hiring when we have open positions. And one of the ways that we've done that has been to make sure that when we know that we're going to have a position open, we have not just simply relied on people who are coming to us and who are applying for our positions. We've actually done a lot of targeted outreach to reach out specifically and intentionally to diverse communities and to diverse audiences and to diverse candidates who might potentially be interested in applying for our position. Sometimes people apply, sometimes people don't apply, but I think that really helps to change the applicant pool that we have, but also to set us up as a place where a reputation gets out and people know that we are in fact the department where we are interested in having a more diverse candidate pool, and that we are consistent about making sure that we are vigilant and self-reflective as we go through the hiring process to make sure that at every stage of our hiring process, we have racial diversity in our candidate pool when people are first applying, when people get to the long list of candidates, when we get to the short list of people that we are actually bringing in for interviews. And again, this helps to offset some of the discrimination that can unwittingly happen in the hiring process. I wrote about this in a piece for Harvard Business Review about 6 months ago in a piece called We Built a Diverse Department in 5 Years, Here's How, which lays out some of the processes that we use that really changed our department. Another thing that I would add in terms of research, and this is relatively new, but a colleague of mine, Jake Rosenfeld, in our department here, has shown that actually more wage transparency can help to reduce racial and gender disparities in wages and salaries for workers in private sector companies. This is a project that he's been working on for some time, but his research is starting to show that when companies are more forthright about wages and salary, that actually can help to have an effect of making people more aware of who's being paid what and where discriminatory processes or where wage differences may lie, and encouraging workers to be more conversant and open about discussion of pay processes and who is paid what. When that transparency is there, it becomes a lot harder for organizations, in other words, to be more shrouded in secrecy and silence about who is being paid what and where those differences might be present. So those are just a couple of other things that I think are useful to think about in terms of how organizations can do different things.
Excellent. Thank you so much. I am glad we have that community building around your name, and I feel closer to us now. So I want to pivot a little bit to ask kind of the opposite of the question that I just asked. Again, we know that a lot of the diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging work that we are seeing right now is a result of the murder of George Floyd and other deaths that have occurred that have been publicized. This is not new for the Black community, but they have been on public display more so recently than in our recent past. And so I also am curious about the adverse here and what we might be seeing in terms of trends that bring you concern or worry, and what those trends might be, and why they concern you. And so, Marvin, I want to start with you on this one, and then if anybody else wants to jump in or engage in conversation with Marvin, please do so.
Yeah, it's a great question, and I will start similar to my last call out around talent acquisition. And I think what I see from a lot of companies right now is that they're definitely pushing from an acquisition standpoint, a sourcing standpoint, to get the talent in. But my biggest concern with that is, are they really focused in on the entire employee life cycle? So sourcing and acquisition is just the first two stages. What about once you get them in? What does their onboarding look like? Are they set up for success from day one? What does development look like? Are they getting those development opportunities for those key projects that will put them in front of key leadership to help their projection in terms of career development continue within your company? What are they doing from a promotional standpoint? How are you ensuring that there's equity around promotional processes internally? And then far and foremost, what are you doing exactly to ensure that they don't take the back door? What are you doing to retain that talent within your organization to ensure that they feel like they are in the company that's best for them to continue their career growth, management, et cetera, whatever they might want to focus in on? If they want to be an individual contributor or a manager within your organization, are they set up to do that effectively? And so my main concern is the fact that those other components from a life cycle perspective, and that some companies might not be focused on them as much as they need to. And that's not just from the candidate that you're bringing in, that's from a total company perspective, because you have to ensure that everyone else that's already in the company that has long tenure, right, is set up for supporting those individuals to ensure that they could get that same tenure in due time as well.
I'll jump in too on this. You know, what I'm seeing a lot, and I've seen this cyclically, is exactly what Marvin's saying. It's that push for, we just got to get the people here. We got to get the people here and everything's going to be great, because that's the easier part, right? And if you listen to what everyone here is talking about, we're talking about real structural change to the infrastructure that is the way we do our business. And it is time consuming, and it requires significant buy-in at senior leadership level to drive it. And sometimes what happens is we want to skip over all the infrastructure building to go to training and recruitment. And there's this sort of belief system that if we roll out training, the world will be a utopia in the organization we work in, and everything is great. And I at least see that in a lot of sort of the white dominant spaces, that we just need sensitivity training. I mean, that still exists in people's perspectives, and it's helping shift the conversation. Like, I rarely even put training out into the ethers of the world. Programmatic learning, different, but one-off training, because it serves as I did that, check the box, and I'm able to now make myself feel better that I did this training. Right. So the more people who are listening can understand everything that's being said around, this is a significant time and person and financial investment that has a significant return, but that return can be 2 or 3 or 4 years down the road before you start to really see it. It's the long game. And I always call it a circle. It's not a line. It's not linear. It's circular.
I like
Thanks
the
so
call
much.
out.
Go ahead, Marvin.
Just one last point there, because I like the call out, Ryan, in terms of the monetary component to that. I think the other concern I have within that space is when companies figure out how to monetize retention. And there's a balance in that, because if you create a process for monetizing someone and incentivizing them to come to your company, once that's done, do they stay? Right. And so a lot of companies will do a sign-on promotion, or you stay within 2 years, 4 years, et cetera. You get this added restricted stock or additional compensation. And once those wonderful things are gone, are you able to still retain them within the company? And that's another concern that I'm starting to see across a couple of different companies.
I'll jump in here with one concern as well, is the push, as my colleagues have said, to get people on board and to get them into roles. And when you look internally, sometimes people may be talented, but haven't been cultivated and supported to be ready for success on day one in that new role. So we have to caution against just putting someone with a Black face in a role to fill the quota. Right. And I know we don't like to hear that word. And that does a disservice. It does a disservice to the organization. It does a disservice to the individual. And it does a disservice to the group that individual actually represents. So I know some of you have heard of the tightrope or prove it again. But tightrope is where people of color and females have a very short rope to make a mistake. Whereas as a white male, you can make a mistake and be okay. But as a woman or a person of color, you make a mistake, you're out. And now the people that look like you are now questioned, are they qualified for a role? So I'll give you guys a great example. I had a recent conversation with someone that's a coaching client of mine about a employee that was in their company who was a Black female who behaved in a way that was not aligned with the company's culture. And they tried to work with this individual. And one of the things she said to them is, well, I act like this because I'm Black. And I was like, well, that is not what being Black looks like. And those behaviors were just a demonstration of a lack of emotional intelligence, right? But one of the leaders said to this person, see, because of the way she behaved, it's going to be hard to hire another Black female for a role like that. And my response was, well, I've seen white men act like that for years over my career, and they actually move them into another position or out of the organization, but there's never a question of, is a white male qualified for that type of role? So we have to be very careful and be conscious of the tightrope that we're giving Black people in these positions. Everyone has an opportunity, should have an opportunity to make a mistake and recover and not be ostracized. And the group should not be dependent on one person's success or failure.
Marion, thank you so much. You gave me a softball actually for my next question. And so would love to have Adia start, but historically and recently, but Black people know and have been told and were raised knowing that in order to succeed at even 50% of what their white peers are, they must work at least 2 times harder, be 2 times better, etc. And so curious, again, Marion gave a perfect example of this, but do you still see this as the case? Are there things that are happening that are still sending the signal that that's the reality? And are there ways in which organizations or businesses can be far more intentional in not sending that message?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the data on this is extremely conclusive and pretty incontrovertible, that there are significant, long-standing remaining barriers for Black workers in particular across settings, right? This isn't limited to one industry. It's not limited to one field. This is part of being Black in the workplace today, that there are barriers when it comes to hiring. I mentioned hiring discrimination, and Marion gave the great example of the Economist study by Bertrand and Mullin-Nathan that indicates that name discrimination can be a factor in getting hired. My colleague David Padula, who's at Harvard now, has written an entire book about hiring discrimination in the workplace and the various processes through which Black workers are perceived to be less qualified, that Black men are perceived to have fewer soft skills, that Black women are perceived to have family obligations that keep them from being qualified, capable professionals. And this is only at the hiring level. This doesn't even address what happens once you are able to surmount those barriers and get into an organization where the types of cultural pressures that are present that we've already discussed are there for Black workers. Something that I would add from my recent research is that one of the things that I found is that when organizations purport to care about diversity but lack the infrastructure and the systemic focus on restructuring in such a way that allows Black workers to thrive, I argue that this leads to a process that I call racial outsourcing, where that work actually gets implicitly transferred to Black professionals in the organization who typically are hired to do other things, right? We're not talking about people who are diversity workers. We're talking about regular people who come to do a job that can include accounting or legal work or executive management or whatever. But when organizations do not have that structure in place, but say that diversity is something that they care about, that work gets outsourced to Black professionals who then do what I refer to as equity work. And that's the work of making these organizations more available and more accessible to communities of color. And ultimately what that leads to is a whole entire other job that these workers are doing on top of the work that they actually were hired to do. That work is uncompensated. It does not get the recognition that it deserves. And it allows organizations to reap the benefit of these Black workers' labor without these Black workers actually directly benefiting from the additional work that they are doing. So I think it's really important when we think about how there are persistent and ongoing challenges for Black workers to be mindful of the myriad of forms that this work takes and how this is processed as part of an ongoing part. Ryan made the point that this is a circular process, right? I think that's a really useful metaphor for thinking about how Black workers face challenges in organizational spaces that aren't just limited to getting in. It's not just limited to this question that Marion brought up of mentorship or sponsorship. This is an ongoing part of the challenge of being present in these organizations. And until organizations shift their mindset of thinking about who their workers are and stop implicitly thinking that they are going to tacitly hire white workers, but there may be a few workers of color who fit into the organizational structure. Until organizations really think about what it means to be more racially diverse and what it means to bring in more workers of color and what that's going to imply for the workers that they are hiring, I think that these types of processes are simply going to keep continuing.
Well, see, that's why we better say your name, right?
Yeah. So first, oh my God, yes. Thank you for bringing that into this conversation, Dr. Wingfield. The other point, I just wanted to jump in because I feel like I'm on a crusade to be able to support and amplify the voices of employee resource group leaders, because this is that racial outsourcing and is exactly what organizations end up doing, in which they say employee resource groups are pivotal to our diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging strategy. It is crucial that these groups are there to support all the work that we're doing until it becomes time for compensation, until it becomes time for performance reviews. Because in performance reviews, the work you do as an ERG leader is on your own time. When it comes to compensation, it's on your own time. But when it comes to talking about and elevating externally the work that your ERGs are doing, you're a key and crucial component of the organization. And I'm actually having a conversation with a couple of Black ERG leaders in our network this week as part of Black History Month, because I want to be able to give that space for them to share, you know, what are the challenges? They're leading roles in marketing, accounting, you know, data analysis, and also being presidents of their Black ERGs. And like, that's not fair. Honestly, that's not fair that they're not getting compensated for that. So just wanted to share, ERGs are a perfect example of that work within organizations.
Anybody else want to add anything?
They dropped the mic.
I knew you were
on that
coming,
one. There's
Marion.
nothing-
I knew
No,
you were
I said
coming.
they dropped the mic on that one. There's nothing to add.
Excellent. So next question for you all is about advice. And so we are all navigating our careers or supporting other leaders, whether through sponsorship, mentorship in particular. And would just love to hear from you all if you have advice for Black leaders on how they can navigate their own growth and path. And that is for any one of you.
All right, I know I'm a talker, so I'll jump in here. Oh, Marvin, go ahead.
All right, I got you. So I usually have 5 key points around this that I try to hold myself accountable to. And the first one is being fluid with my responsibilities. So have that flexibility that we talked about earlier in terms of when I get tapped on the shoulder to support a project, I might have no idea how to do it, but be willing to do it and create a network as number 2 that's going to help me be supportive in ensuring that I could achieve whatever that task might be. But from a network standpoint, it's also just about connecting with others outside of your own immediate team. Within the organization, also outside of the organization. How are you keeping your network together, even in this wonderful COVID environment, right? And so I'll do 15-minute chats or video chats with people internal to the company or external. And then for those that I need more time with, I'll set up 30 minutes, an hour, and just have some deep dialogue conversations with. Number 3 was tied to ensuring that you are engaged with more than your immediate team. And what I mean by that is one of our colleagues on the panel referenced it earlier, but ensuring that you know your manager's managers and others within their peer group, because you don't know who might be speaking for you or against you in those behind the door conversations that's going to help promote you up or get you onto that key project or team. The 4th is around having a game plan. So from a visionary standpoint, where do you want to be in 5 years? Where do you want to be in 10 years? And work backwards. So that way you know what positions you need to be in, what engagements you need to get you to achieve that goal by that 5-year, 10-year timeframe. And then the last one is just be aware of your own wealth. And that's not from a monetary standpoint. It's about values and skill set. And ensure whatever skill set you have and whatever values you have are aligned to the position that you're in at your company. And if they're not aligned, then it might be time for you to reevaluate.
Go ahead, Marion.
I'll let someone else go, and then you can come back.
No.
Go
ahead, Marion.
Okay, so I'll build off of that. So Marvin and I, the first parts of our names are the same because we have the same philosophy on a lot of things. But just to build on that, is one thing I always reinforce is to do your job and do it at a level of excellence, the job you are hired to do today. I run into a lot of people, and not just people of color, but people in general that I mentor or coach who are ready for the next role, but they're not giving their all to the role that they are in right now. So make sure you are doing the job that you're being paid for today with excellence. That's one. Development. You have to have a robust developmental plan. Even if and it's much easier to adjust a plan than to create a plan in a crisis. So you need to know where you want to go, and then what are the steps that you plan to take, and then get alignment with your leadership around, this is where I want to go. These are the strengths that I feel that I have. Here are 2 areas of opportunity that I need to focus on, and here's my action plan. Are you aligned with this? Because now you will be co-creating something that holds yourself as well as your leadership accountable for your development. So that's critically important. And the last thing I will add is to get involved. People invest in people who are investing in themselves as well as willing to invest in other people. So start supporting other people in your group and outside of your group. Start coaching, start networking to help other people, and people will instantly start to rally around you to help you.
Thanks so much, Marion. Well, I am going to pause this again for a commercial break. Steve is going to jump in, and then we are going to jump into some audience questions. Steve?
Thanks, Mila. We're from day one, and we're talking about history in the making, the future of Black leadership in corporate America. Thanks again to our sponsors, Bravely, Monster, Emtrain, and LCW. I wanted to just inject one note here. All of you speakers have been citing so many fascinating research reports and articles and books. And so I've been busy getting questions from our audience. After the program, I'll follow up with you and then share some of those specific citations with them. At this time, we'll be taking some questions from our audience. So Mila, back to you.
Excellent. So super excited to start to engage with questions from our audience. And so want to start with a question in, what is your response reaction to non-people of color being more engaged in D&I initiatives more than Black employees? And so I will have that for anyone. These are not my questions, so I didn't get to tee you up. So I would ask no more than 2 people so that we can just keep moving through as many questions as possible.
Could you say the question again, Mila?
Absolutely, I sure can. Thank you for asking. What is your reaction to non-people of color being more engaged in D&I initiatives more than Black employees?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I mean, I think my personal view is that these issues of DEI are an organizational issue more so than they are an independent one, right? Or an interpersonal one. So in an organization where there are people who are not people of color who are more invested and involved, I don't necessarily think that's a problem. Where I think the bigger issue though lies is that, and this is one of the arguments that I make in the research that I was just referencing, these issues aren't issues that I think can be solved by a few individuals scattered here and there throughout an organization. These are systemic structural things that have to change at the organizational level. So the issue to me is not whether there are some people who are not people of color who are more invested in these issues of DEI. The issue to me is the organization taking on, as an organization, the types of structural changes that need to happen so that everybody in the organization has the opportunity to thrive and succeed and do well, right? And if you have an organization where there are a few people who are not people of color who are working to change this, but they're butting up against an organizational structure that's indifferent or that's creating barriers or that's maintaining barriers, to me, that in and of itself is not an improvement. The improvement has to be when the organization has policies and structures and goals and procedures in place that allow everyone to succeed and thrive, rather than just certain people who are scattered in the organization piecemeal.
Excellent, thank you. So I'm going to go to the next question, and I'm going to do my best not to destroy this question. I think I'm extracting what the audience member is saying. And so this goes back to the conversation about bringing your whole self to work. And so the audience member is asking, how do we encourage bringing your whole self to work without marginalizing others? And so what she said in particular is, I had one of my Black leaders, and I apologize, I said she, and I don't know the accurate pronoun, so please forgive me. I had one of my Black leaders reach out to me to help me think with her about how to give feedback to another Black employee on comments related to white people always. She struggled with this because she understood what the employee was trying to say, felt for her white team members as well. And so I'm happy to do my best in trying to better suss out what she's asking. But I wonder if anybody is able to pick up on the question and respond to it. Go ahead, Marvin.
So if I'm understanding the question correctly, and I'll take it from an angle of extracting out the ethnic reference there. If anyone makes a statement that you should course correct, then you should work with that person to course correct it, regardless of gender, race, etc., because it's an educational moment for them. And if you don't share that with them, then you kind of strip them of that opportunity, because they might not even be aware consciously that they're actually stating it in a way that might be offensive. And so doesn't mean you got to do it publicly or in that moment. You could pull that person to the side later on and just share, hey, based off that comment you mentioned earlier, wanted to talk about that. And so that's how I would see that question. And then you could plug and play any race or gender into it, but it's an opportunity for growth and learning, whether that person is aware of what they said or not.
Love that.
I'll just add, I'll add on to that. And that's not bringing your whole self to work, the definition that I have. But that is not bringing your whole self to work, because you're not creating an inclusive and comfortable environment. So we have to create comfortable environments or spaces to have uncomfortable conversations. And by always and all of those types of statements, you're not creating that, right? So I think we have to be conscious of how we're delivering our message. It's not always what you say, but it's how you say it. And I think to Marvin's point, just giving a little coaching of, some people could have received that, what you said this way, this is how I received it. I would just ask you to be conscious of that, or to think of other ways to deliver the message so people can receive it versus instantly setting up a block from what you're trying to say.
Excellent. Thank you so much. So I want to ask a question that's shown up. What are the biggest blockers to getting folks at a company who are not on a DEI or human resource team to getting them invested into continuous improvement platforms? Specifically, when it comes to those initiatives that build ongoing inclusion and belonging, it seems to be treated as a nice to have versus a must do. So I think the question is, what are the biggest blockers? But I'm also going to add to this question in a bit to say, how do we extend beyond it just being DEI leader or human resource team?
So I have some academic colleagues who've actually written about this. Frank Dobbin and Alexandra Kalev have argued that organizations can actually yield more success by bringing in people who are not necessarily DEI professionals to be part of that work. And what they argue is that when managers are put in a position where they either explicitly or implicitly feel like they are being blamed for outcomes, or that they are being saddled with responsibilities for things that are beyond their control, they're a lot more likely to be resentful of organizational efforts to try to create change, right? And that makes sense. If you're being told, you're responsible for this thing that you don't have any say over, then it's not hard to see why people would feel frustrated and not be supportive of those types of initiatives. But what they find is that when managers are put into situations where they can be part of task forces or part of groups that are called to work with DEI professionals to think about how organizations can change some of their, again, structural processes that may be inadvertent or that may be implicit, but ultimately serve to reinforce racial disparities, having managers on board with this process helps to get them a lot more involved and a lot more supportive of these processes than they might otherwise be, right? So when managers see for themselves, to go back to some of the conversations we're having before about how hiring discrimination happens, and when people pull from those who are already in their circles, when managers see for themselves, hey, when we talk only to people that we know or only people from our alma mater, we're getting the same types of people. We had no idea that if we go to Spelman, Morehouse, Howard, Fisk, Hampton, we open ourselves up to a whole world of amazing applicants that we didn't know anything about. That helps them to see that the processes that they have been engaged in are processes that are, again, perhaps unwittingly reinforcing some of the dynamics that they're trying to work against. And when they see that firsthand, and when they see that they can be part of that process, that helps to bring in people who otherwise might, if things are just being externally imposed upon them, be otherwise a bit more resentful and unwilling to make those kinds of changes. So I think their research indicates that when we offer people who are not necessarily DEI professionals, but who are in managerial roles, the support and the resources and the direct involvement to be part of this productive change, their work shows that in more cases than not, they actually take to that work more comfortably than we might otherwise think, and certainly do so more so than if they are just told, hey, create these outcomes and make these changes and just get it done without the commensurate support that goes along with it.
One thing I'll add, I just love hearing you speak about all of this, by the way, so I want to connect with you more after this. But one thing I'd like to add is to really thinking about, there's a really risk right now of putting the responsibility, and it's not even right now, we've done it for years, on one demographic or another to solve the DEI issues. And what I'm seeing right now, more so than I've seen in the past, is this real divide where folks are feeling like, all white allies need to not be in part of the solution, not be part of the conversation. And it goes back to what you were saying, Mila, at the very beginning, that quote that you gave around, this is all of our problem. Now, I'm not suggesting we want to have all the white executives in power own it and speak constantly. We do need to create a space and teach the skills of learning, of listening. We need to teach people how to hear each other. But one of the big barriers right now that I'm witnessing is just this divide that is increasing the burden on marginalized individuals to hold the space. And we will never move the organization forward if we don't do it together.
Ryan, you teed up beautifully the next question I'm going to that came from an audience member. They referenced specifically Marion's example around reverse mentoring. I think it was Marion, please accept my apology if it was someone else, around reverse mentoring, and think it would do a world of good for the leaders at the org where they work, themselves included. And every Black person they know in the US is fatigued given the acts of racism that are being publicized more and more. How do we pursue reverse mentoring, Mila insert, supporting this work in totality without burdening our Black peers?
I mean,
Come on, Dion.
I can just start to say it goes back to that sense of autonomy, right? So if I, as a Black employee, have the option to choose to do that and have the emotional bandwidth to choose to do that, I want to have those opportunities to do it. But if I feel that I don't have the emotional capacity or bandwidth to do it, or I don't have the capacity in general, because again, this is another job that is added on top of the work that is normally uncompensated and not recognized. If I say, you know what, I'm good not trying to save this organization. I'm set not trying to save the world. I want to just do my job in the same way that other people have the opportunity to do. That should be fine too. And it's really about how do you provide the sense of choice to do it? Because what has happened throughout the pandemic is some of our allies have said, I want to support, what do I do? I'm going to call Dion right now to say, what do I do? Right. And now I, as a Black employee, am dealing with my own processing of events. I'm dealing with how I'm balancing how like my personal life and what I'm able to accomplish at work. And I'm also making space for allies to then have them share their experiences with me, and me then be the wise sage to say, it's okay, you are still a good person. It's all right. Here are the things that you need to do moving forward. Here are all the links that you can also find on Google. Here are all the movies that you can also find on Netflix. Here are all of the podcasts that you can also find on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, all of the things. And I say that because there is like as you can tell, I'm passionate about this. There is a like lack of critical thinking, and it just feels like a loss when it comes to DEI work and like supporting people. Where it's like, you know what? I don't know how to Google to find this. Like, I just don't know. I just don't know how to do it. Right. So when it comes, and that's a tangent, but specifically in this conversation, it's important for folks who have the choice to do it because other folks do, and they get to pick and choose when they enter the conversation. And in this specific instance, Black people often don't. So I'll end it there.
I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt. So I just want to add, I noticed most of Marvin and Ryan for certain laughing along with me when Dion said this. And I don't think it was because it was funny per se. I think it was because it was so spot on and so relatable and an experience that so many of us have. And it made me think that while I understand the sentiment behind this idea of reverse mentoring, I am not sure that I personally agree with it in the framework of being a mentor in the way that we often think about it in the workplace, for the reason that Dion described. Because to me, and I'm a college professor, I work at a university. My job is teaching people, and my job is educating people about these issues. And yet I cannot imagine anything more exhausting than the prospect of doing my job for free on my off hours. That sounds absolutely dreadful, particularly in the era of the internet where there is Google and there are resources and there are books and there are articles and there's a myriad of research that a variety of people have done that talks about and addresses these issues. So while I think the underlying thing of reverse mentoring, of being in a position to guide and educate people to learn more about these issues related to race, is certainly a really valuable and useful one. I just want to wholeheartedly second Dion's points about the particulars of autonomy in that issue and the particulars of foisting that responsibility on people who, again, are already employed, are already doing jobs, and who may not have the emotional bandwidth to take on that responsibility, particularly when, again, there are contexts and spaces where people are actually paid for that labor, right? There's ways to audit university classes that you can take if you're interested in finding out more of this from a paid professional who's qualified and capable to do that work. And I'm not offering myself in that work. I'm just saying that there are ways to actually go about doing this in a way that makes sense, in addition to looking up the variety of work that people have written for non-academic audiences, the podcasts that people have done, the films that are out there, that can be a way of taking on this responsibility without having to unduly and additionally burden people of color, particularly employees for whom that is not and should not be their primary or even secondary responsibility.
I'll just add on to that because I agree with what both of you said wholeheartedly. I think there's an opportunity to ask questions. What are you seeing in the organization? What are you seeing in society? What are some of your thoughts or recommendations that for us? And then the secondary question is there any part of it that you would like to be involved in? So it's an invitation versus a request to fix the problem. And so I think that's a great way to approach it.
I think that's a really important point. That's an important point from the perspective of white people that I interact with on this topic, is afraid to either talk about it at all, or they'll tokenize and go to the one person of color they know. But this idea of taking action, but through those questions of, I want to support this work. What are things you see so I can line up whatever it is I'm lining up on this side versus, Dion, can you come do this for me? Because I don't know who else to talk to. It's very different. And I think what I encourage white people who are new to this to think about is your lens first. Like, turn the mirror on yourself first. If you've never thought about your whiteness and how it impacts the space you're interacting with, that's a starting place.
Yeah, and I'll just add one last point because I think it brings it back to our wonderful employee resource groups, business resource groups. So I get that question a lot, like, how can you help me do this? Can you help me do that? And I typically will start by asking, are you a part of a BRG? We call our employee resource groups business resource groups. Go join a BRG because they do this day in, day out with some of the content educational wise, getting you involved from a different angle. And that creates an opportunity for them to really evaluate, are they serious about what they are asking? But also be able to connect it back to the business. So that way they could say, hey, I've been a part of this and this is what I'm learning within that. And they build out their own network because a lot of them that might be within a particular BRG may not already have a network within that BRG. So it's a great opportunity to kind of divert, but also be able to answer those questions for, certain individuals or leaders, because each of us probably get that question more than we can handle, and be able to, respectfully respond back to on a daily basis.
So want to dig into this question that came from an attendee as well. As a young Black male in HR, I am the only young male, 26, in an HR business partner role. All of my other peers are older, over 45. We won't go there, and white. I have engaged my boss to understand that I am eager in employee development and would like to develop myself to sharpen my career path and grow within an organization. However, they have denied all my requests for certifications and succession planning, and it's disappointing. What advice would you give me? What advice would you give to someone like me who's young, ambitious, and eager to grow within an organization that does not support my career path or growth?
So I'll just start with my number 5 from earlier. Be aware of your worth. And so if your skill set, if your desire to move upward within your career is not aligned with the company you're at, then you need to have those conversations internally. It sounds like you have tried to have them in terms of training and development opportunities to grow your skills. And so you might have to have some, hard conversations with yourself, but also with your network and your sponsors or mentors to say, here's my situation. What should I do about it? This is what I'm thinking. I just need to ensure that I'm not, blinded by any current bias that might be occurring against me. So.
I'll just add the developmental plan, right? So if you lay out your developmental plan and how these certifications and courses align with preparing you for that next level, that's a critical conversation starter with leaders. And the other thing I would say is it sounds like you are aligning just with your manager. And we all know that sometimes the manager is not the best person or the person that's going to support you. So as Marvin said, what does your network look like? So operate internally and externally. So in my book I was referring to, I have a section on how to get around a bad boss, right? Because we've all had bad bosses, just don't be one. But how do you navigate around a bad boss? And if someone's not supporting you, that developmental plan is a key tool. So you could meet someone or someone in your organization and say, hey, I have my developmental plan. I'm thinking about these types of roles. I'd love to set up 15 minutes to get feedback from you on the plan. Instantly, you have someone else that's invested in your development who can give you some ideas on how to navigate. So I would look outside of your current manager as well, not stepping over them, but around, and also making sure that you have a robust developmental plan and a link what you're asking for to where you're trying to go.
One last point I'll just add to that, because based off the way the question was phrased, my question to that person would be, are you investing in yourself? So it sounds like you're wanting the company to pay for your development, which in certain cases, companies should do that. But if they're not, in this situation, are you willing to do it yourself? And so if you are, then invest in yourself and get that class and get that certification that you want.
Excellent. Next question is, what are your thoughts on how to approach revamping an organization's succession planning procedures in a way that effectively disrupts barriers to advancement for people of color. And so I'm asking this question, but I think there's also a more global question around system structures that inhibit individuals, specifically individuals of color, from growth. And so would absolutely want us to answer this, but also think holistically about the things that are happening, the systems, tools, structures, infrastructures that are in place. So approach on revamping to anyone who wants to take it.
I'll start. So one of the things I would say in this space, and it hits on the comment I made earlier about company mechanisms and processes that are in place. In some companies, you still have what I will phrase as the founding fathers or members that created a lot of the processes in place. And so in their eyes, it's their baby, it's what they've created for the company, it's what helped them get to the roles that they're in now. And so if you're wanting to identify ways to address those opportunities, you have to do it in a way that's not adversely impacting their approach of the fact that they've created something for the company. And so you really have to start to zero in on where are those areas that we can nitpick at and identify what type of return on investment, if we change this process, if we change this mechanism, is it going to provide to the company? And do it over time. It's not all going to happen at once. Change management is a long process at times, especially at things that are structurally created within the culture of the company. And so identify where those key influence components are and begin to work at those. And then eventually you'll gain some momentum over time to be able to truly change the projection of the company.
I'll add regarding the succession plan component of the question is that there has to be some rigor around evaluating who's on those succession plans for key roles within the organization, and is there diversity as a part of it? And if not, why? And what are we going to do about it? Is the talent internal that we need to cultivate to add to the succession plan, or do we need to be networking outside of the organization to ensure that there is diversity in our succession plans? But if we, to Marvin's point, just keep going with what we've done in the past, as far as the succession planning process is concerned, and don't disrupt the thought process or even evaluate who's on those plans, we will continue to have the same problem. So one of the things that we're doing is now my DE&I team is involved in the succession plan. So we talk through with the leaders about specific roles, and we sit in on the conversation to ensure that we are getting a 360 lens. My goal is eventually where we won't need to be there. But for now, we want to make sure that we are all looking at it together and developing plans to move forward. It's not about a gotcha, you're not doing something. It's about how can we all come together to solve a potential problem that we see.
Excellent. So we have about 3 minutes left. And so as opposed to asking another question, I would just love any final thoughts from all of the panelists, either from the conversation we've had today, whether you've heard something, learned something, want to repeat something, if something else is sitting on your heart, your spirit. Dion, if you want to tell us some things about some other things, but would love to just hear if there are just any remaining thoughts from what has been a phenomenal panel.
Well, I get you queued me up. So, well, no, Dr. Winfield, this is your time.
Alphabetical order by first name.
Do it.
Let's do it.
So yeah, this has been such a really interesting discussion. I really enjoyed this conversation. I appreciate having the opportunity to be a part of it. I think I would just conclude by saying that the conversations that we're having, both in this discussion that are taking place in bigger industries more broadly right now, are so timely and so important in this particular context, right? And every time I talk about these issues of work and race and inequality in the workplace, one of the things that I always want to drive home to people is that we are at a point now where the US's racial demographics are changing, and that's just happening, right? No matter what weird things happen with the census, we are at a point where the demographics of this population are going to become more racially diverse than they have been at any point in our country's history. And so that puts us at an inflection point, I think, as people who are thinking and talking about organizations and where they're going in the future. And in my view, I don't really see any way that you can have organizations that are well suited to meeting the needs of a multiracial population and a multiracial community if those organizations don't reflect the needs of those communities internally, right? And we're at a point now where we've had a lot of opportunities in the US to take stock and rethink some of our racial practices, and we've had some fits and starts, and we've made some progress and we've taken some steps back. But we are really at a point now where within the next 20 years, we are going to irreversibly go down this path of being more racially diverse and having this more racially demographic population. Our organizations, our workplaces are not in a place to currently, as it stands, meet those populations' needs. So I think that infuses these discussions around race and diversity with a lot more significance, with a great deal of heightened importance, and a lot more critical necessity of thinking about how organizations can rethink and restructure themselves to be attuned to the needs of a 21st century population that's going to include a lot more people who are Black, Brown, Asian American, North African, Middle Eastern, and so forth. And that's a conversation that we need to be having, but it also undergirds the importance of getting this conversation and getting these actions done right this time, and not simply retreading conversations that we've already had.
And actually, I'm going to jump in because we are at time. Adia, you are beautiful, and I think you did a beautiful job summarizing it. As much as I would love to hear from everyone on the panel, we have run out of time, but I thank you so much for engaging so thoughtfully, and couldn't have asked for a better person to actually wrap up in front of our collective thinking. And so thank you for that. Steve?
Yep. Well, thank you, Mila. The time flew by. Thanks to our wonderful speakers. You were so generous with your time, your thoughts, your experiences. A great conversation. Thanks to our sponsors, Bravely, Monster, Emtrain, and LCW, and to all of you in the audience for participating today and asking excellent questions. If you'd like to join us for more virtual events, you can head to our website, fromday1.co, and check out more of our upcoming webinars. Next one is Thursday, March 4th. We'll have a webinar titled How to be Anti-Racist in Your Tech Hiring. On Tuesday, March 9th, Engagement and Retention Trends for 2021. Thanks, everyone. Stay well.